Hi, welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series. This is session 7. Last night, the group finally made it to Gracklstugh, the city of the Grey Dwarves in the Underdark, the duergar. So they spent several sessions traveling through the Underdark once they escaped Velkenvelv. And they had all decided, because Bupito was like, hey, let's go to Gracklstugh because we can get new supplies and stuff. And so they decided to go there, even though it was a 28-day journey. They finally made it. Last session, of course, they finally realized that Bupito was convinced that he is a god and was trying to kill them one by one to make, I guess, rituals for his own glory. And instead of killing them, they captured him. So they were on the verge of Gracklstugh. And so the way we started the adventure, and by the way, let me make a couple of notes here before I get into what happened last night. One, the more I read and study the adventure, I really wish they would have gone to Sloop-Ludop and then from there went to Gracklstugh. Now, the way Out of the Abyss is written, it's open-ended. They can go wherever they want. It seems like when I watch let's plays or read other people's write-ups of the adventure, a lot of people go to Sloop-Ludop first because it's closer. It's like 8 days, I think, from Velkenvelv, where you begin the adventure. And then you also get a very dramatic encounter with Demogorgon, and then you can travel to Gracklstugh by boat, which makes it easier to get into the city. My players, I gave them the choice, gave them the information, the travel times, and where all they could go, and they had chose to go to Gracklstugh because they wanted new equipment. Whereas I think the argument to go to Sloop-Ludop, if I'm saying that right, from Shushar the Kuatoa, was basically he just wanted to go to his people, and maybe they could find some boats or aid or something there, if I remember right. So the other thing I want to say before I go any further, Gracklstugh, researching Gracklstugh, reading about it, seeing how other people play it, and then actually playing it last night. This just reinforces my opinion that Out of the Abyss is not a good. This is, of course, Out of the Abyss is the adventure we're playing. This is not a good adventure for a first time or a very hesitant or newbie DM who doesn't feel that they're still kind of learning the ropes. And there's a lot going on in this adventure. I mean, from the very beginning. The character's in a very tough situation. You have a lot of NPCs that you're keeping up with. It's very open-ended which way they can go, all the stuff that can happen. And when you get to Gracklstugh, I mean, Gracklstugh has a lot of moving parts. A lot. There's a lot that can happen. So I really, again, anything can happen. I'm not telling people what to do. My personal opinion on this is if you're brand new as a DM, or if you just feel like you're still kind of getting your chops together as a DM and you don't want to tackle a big adventure or difficult, don't do Out of the Abyss. It's a great adventure, but there's a lot going on. And Gracklstugh, I mean, the moving parts, there's so much that can happen. I mean, it's a mini adventure, well, almost like a mini campaign within the overall campaign. There's a lot going on. I'll put in the show notes, in the video notes and in the blog post that I make. But there was let me see if I can find it here. I found this Out of the Abyss Gracklstugh encounter map, and it was done by Robus, ROBUS, on ianworld.org. I'll put a link to this, and this thing, I don't know if you can see that or not. That's kind of like a flowchart of all the different encounters that can happen in Gracklstugh and how they connect. And there's a lot of stuff that can happen. There's multiple ways to get in. It can be hard for the characters to get in. You can get arrested at any moment. The drow are still pursuing you. You have to work in, there's madness going on, there's all these different factions, all these encounters. Again, I don't know how well you can see that, but man, that's a lot, and I'm really thankful to Robus for putting that together. That's helping me get, be prepared for this adventure and to kind of help run people through it. Now, another resource I found is from on Reddit user PurpleVermont. It put together this Gracklstugh help sheets, and it has a list of all the different factions in Gracklstugh, list of major NPCs, who's who, and then stat blocks for various like duergar, Darrows, NPCs, and stuff like that. So very helpful, and I will put links to that in the video notes and on the blog post for this. So very helpful. Thank you both PurpleVermont from Reddit and then also Robus from EN World. Very, very helpful. Now, having said all that, so what we ended up doing last night was, they were on the verge of Gracklstugh. They were camping and would be getting to the city the next day. And I used Jim Jar, the Deep Gnome, and is it Seldus? Hold on a second. I never can remember his name. Sereth, the Drow, to really sit down with the PCs and say, look, now that we're here, you really need to know some stuff about Gracklstugh. And they gave the overview. It's the Grey Dwarves, the duergar. They don't have any problem with slavery. They'll arrest you or even kill you with not a lot of reason. They are a very law-abiding, law-centric society, but it's very dangerous for foreigners there. And there's only one district, the Dark Lake district, where foreigners are even allowed. If you're caught in other parts of the city, you can easily be arrested and enslaved or whatever. Talked about just gave them a heads up. The Grey Dwarves can turn invisible, can enlarge. Never assume that you're not being listened to or spied on in Gracklstugh. And that there's a community of Darrow that live there that are treated very poorly. They're not even second-class citizens. They're worse than that. There's stone giants that live there, and that revealing themselves as escaped prisoners of the Drow would be a bad idea, because there are people within Gracklstugh that would gladly capture them and give them back to the Drow to gain advantage or favor, or is this part of an agreement or an alliance. So just, setting it up to like, hey, yeah, we're kind of at civilization again, but here's the deal. And so they really sat down with them, and I used Sereth and Jimjar basically as the DM's mouthpiece to kind of prep them on what they were getting into with Gracklstugh. And Bupito was like, tied up and gagged, and he's like, trying to tell him, yeah, this is all real, because he doesn't necessarily want to get captured or anything either. He wants to get back into the city so that he's got a little lair in the Whirlstone tunnels where he's building a little shrine to himself, basically. So he wants things to go smooth too. He wants to get back into the city so he can get away and get back to his little lair. So so when they ungagged him at one point, and he was very reasonable and like, yes, they're making sense, and I don't want to get captured either, and da da da. So anyway, and then I also said, hey, you guys need to get together because y'all been wanting to come here and sell and trade and buy. So what, who's keeping track of the treasure? What do you even have? And then I said also, what's your, we talked about how are they going to get into the city? And you could get into the city one of two ways, either by boat or by going to the gates. And since they weren't by boat, and they were like, is there any secret ways in? And I was like, you can either come in by boat, which you don't have boats, or you have to go through the gates and talk your way through the guards. So, there's a lot of, they were like, oh, what are we going to do? They were talking about splitting up and some people staying outside and some people going inside. And I was like, I really hope they don't do that. I didn't say that. I don't want to put them on rails, but they decided in the end not to do that. But anyway, I'd say, hey, what story are y'all going to give? And, what all do you even have to sell? And so I kind of gave them some stuff to talk about. And then I just walked out of the room. I'll do that every now and then. And I'll leave them to discuss. as a group, and then I'll go to the front of the store and talk with the store owner and hang out. Gave them about 5 minutes or so. Went back, and they decided they were just going to claim that they were, you know, had been in a caravan and were here to resupply, and they've been attacked by some Darrow, and this was, you know, they'd captured Bupito as part of that. So that was their thing. It was fine. Works for me. So I took them to the gates. Now at the gates, there's a whole scene. I mean, it's written out in the gates how it works. Um, you know, you got to talk to the guards. You know, they get immediately like a slit opens and somebody challenges them, and other slits open, and there's crossbow bolts pointed at them, and then 6 Darrow, or not Darrow, duergar guards, basically soldiers, appear out of thin air behind them. So, you know, like you guys have been being watched this whole time that you were approaching the gate. Anyway, I think it requires a difficulty check 15 to get through the gates, if I remember right. And let's see if I can, yeah. And I let them have some discussion with the guards. And then of course the guards were like, why is he tied up? And they kept, equivocating on why the Darrow was tied up. And it's like, they're like, why didn't you just kill him? Or not the Darrow, the duergar were like, why didn't you just kill him? And they were like, somebody finally said, so, and this is going through translators there was a couple of characters that could speak Dwarven. So there's a couple of translators. And then the bard had established before the game began why he could speak Undercommon, and I agreed with the reasoning. So there's some discussion in Undercommon going on. But finally, somebody said, well, he amuses us. And the guard's like, why didn't you just tell us he was a slave? Why all this other? But anyway, they seem to be like, and their original plan was they were going to take Bupito to Gracklstugh and quote unquote turn him over to the authorities. And Jimjar and Sereth and Bupito were like, because like the one thing they just hammered into him: don't draw attention to yourself in Gracklstugh. Don't draw attention to yourself. So they're like the duergar don't want him. There's enough crazy Darrow running around Gracklstugh as it is. So anyway, finally they were like, well, why didn't you just say he was a slave? And everyone's like, haha, yeah, he's a slave. So it takes a DC 15 to get through the gates. I let the bard rolled. He was going to be their spokesman, and he rolled a 14. I figured that was close enough to kind of not get them through. Now, if you fail by more than 5, I think you get arrested. But that wasn't enough to completely blow it, but it wasn't enough to get them in. And I figured, I was like, well, I was either going to have somebody else try it, or I figured the bard is speaking Undercommon, which the guards at the gate like that, right? Here's somebody who speaks Undercommon. So I gave him one more shot, and he made it, like at 18 or 19. So they got through. And when you get through, basically the book, it says there's a Darrow, or not, I keep saying Darrow, a duergar, those 6 duergar or whatever, escort you to the Dark Lake District. And they hammered in foreigners only allowed in the Dark Lake District and if you're found outside of that, it's, either arrest or death, right? So really hammered that in. So they're escorted to the Dark Lake District. Now there's this other occurrence that's supposed to happen at the gates that I didn't do. I don't necessarily dislike it. There was other stuff we got 2 hours per session. There was stuff I wanted to hit. And I just didn't do this. But there's a guard after you get through the gates that's supposed to kind of pop out of nowhere, or maybe come out of a little secret door or something. And he's kind of like, hey, and basically he's gone crazy and he's collecting magic weapons or unique weapons, and the people are supposed to negotiate with him. And it's supposed to be really obvious something's gone wrong here, because it's supposed to be showing the madness of Gracklstugh, that he's being very, open about all this, basically wanting to be bribed. And then if you come to an agreement and try to give him something, he's like, oh, don't give it to me. Go to my friend at the docks and give it to him there and all that. I didn't do that. Like I said, there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. But, you know, we'd already spent probably about 30 minutes just in discussion. What do you guys want to do? Getting them ready for Gracklstugh, all that, getting to the gates. And I just didn't feel that it was necessary. But like I said, I'm not saying it was a bad encounter. I may actually have it happen at another point in the game, you know, but maybe not necessarily at the gates, because if you go to that contact at the docks, that can kick off some other stuff. Once again, this whole, you know, interconnected series of possible events. It's like a Rube Goldberg machine. A lot of moving parts to this adventure. So they get into Gracklstugh, and they basically Jim Jar. I took this opportunity once they got into Gracklstugh. Jim Jar took his leave. Jim Jar, the Deep Gnome, and the reason I did that, once again, there's just Jim Jar is fun and everything, but I got so many NPCs I'm keeping up with, and I thought this was a good time to have Jim Jar move on. He's like, I've got contacts here, I've got friends here, and I think it said in the book that Jim Jar and Bupito are from Gracklstugh, if I remember right. Could be wrong. Or at least he's familiar with it. So I had Jim Jar move on, and the wizard, the necromancer, who had kind of built up a relationship with Jim Jar, and they did a lot of betting together. He's like, Jim Jar owes me money. I was like, well, I don't know, does he? So, and Jim Jar's thing is that he bets obsessively, and he keeps a really good tally in his head of who owes what. So I had them roll basically intelligence, and whoever rolled highest, the other person owed them, and then the difference between the two rolls was how much was owed, and it ended up my character won, or my player won, by 7. So Jim Jar had ended up owing him 7 gold. So he said, and this was a good way to introduce them to the one inn in the entire Gracklstugh city that will take foreigners. I can't remember the name. It's a really weird name. Let me see if I can find it off the top of my head. It's like Boral. The Goldborn's lair, which is Boulette in Jorvish, which is a kind of a monster, a real weird like land shark looking monster in D&D. So he's like, oh, this, you know, go to that inn, and I will either come there and meet you in the next day or two, or send word, and I will get you your money. And so that was a way to introduce the inn to the characters too. So Jim Jar stepped off. And he's gone for the time being anyway. So, and I've got my little sheet here that tracks all the NPCs, and you know, I've got X's over the ones that are dead, and now I'm drawing, I don't know if you can see it, little circles around the ones that are not in the party currently, and their whereabouts are unknown. So did that, and I was also taking pains to describe Gracklstugh. You know, it's very imposing and large, blocky edifices, and constant sound of hammering, and constant red glow from the smelting and smithing and all that, and smoke billowing from stalactites and stalagmites, and there's vents in the cavern ceiling, and but there's still sort of a fog, sort of a smoky fog that clings to the city, and it's just hot, and you know, red and lurid, hellish, you know, kind of describing the city. Kind of getting the atmosphere of it. And there's also a mechanic in the game called Grackle Lung, which after every long rest, people make a Constitution saving throw, and they may start coughing and getting levels of exhaustion. And if they get too many levels of exhaustion, they can die. So I don't think I'm going to let anybody die from Grackle Lung, but I will introduce that. So anyway, so they went to the Blade Bazaar. And you know, I was like, man, you guys are so happy to be in civilization, but it's still kind of crazy here, and you still feel kind of and you know, but it's amazing to finally be back, and you know, as there's all these different races and all this hubbub and stuff going on, and I said, so you're kind of conflicted, like it's great to be back in civilization, but you're still kind of creeped out, and it's, you know, oppressive, and it's still not home by any means. So anyway, so they went to the Blade Bazaar. Now I want to mention the drow pursuit mechanic. There's still rules for it in Gracklstugh. You can still get caught up to by the drow, or at least observed, at least noticed and observed, and you may notice that you're being observed. But anyway, I didn't for the session last night. I just left the pursuit level exactly like it was, which is a 3 from the session before. I didn't mess with it last night. I just like, hey, they're going to have one day where they're doing their thing, and then starting in future sessions, I'm going to bring the pursuit, which the Drow pursuit rules, there's a slight addendum to how it works in Gracklstugh, um, and it's for each day of this, for each long rest, and I'll get into it, next session as I start bringing it back into this particular game. But for last night, I just put it on hold and didn't worry about it. And I'm still keeping my travel log that I've started before that shows how many days they've traveled and where they're traveling towards and what the pursuit level is. And now I'm also tracking the madness level for my characters because madness levels play a part um, in this game. Um, so anyway, they went to the Blade Bazaar, and I basically said, guys and gals, um, if it's in the player's handbook, if it's non-magical uh, weapons, armor, or shields, then it's there at the Blade Bazaar. Um, and then it's also in the book doesn't say this, but they need to they've gone. This is session 7. They haven't had a chance to buy or do anything. That this adventure is very stingy at the beginning with what the characters have, and I've really instilled that sense of loss and lack and depression and or oppression, not depression. So I wanted to give them, hey, you guys. So even though the book didn't say it, I said that if it's just regular adventuring gear, not magical or some crazy stuff, it's regular adventuring gear, or if it's a non-magical armor, shields, or uh, weapons, then you can buy it at the Blade Bazaar at the normal prices in the player's handbook. And I said anything you want to sell, you can sell at normal prices. So I think most stuff in the player's handbook sells at 50%. So I just said knock yourself out. So I let them go shopping. And normally I wouldn't just halt the game and let them shop for 10, 15, 20 minutes. But again, it had been this whole adventure, they hadn't had a chance to do any of that. And they hadn't, they lost all their equipment at the beginning of the adventure. They hadn't really had a chance to shop or anything like that. And I wanted them to get a little bit of a payoff for making it to Gracklstugh and all this. So I let them shop. And they sold they had gotten a lot of stuff out of the armory uh, and in Valkenvelve. And they had a couple little gemstones from random rolls at the beginning of the adventure for stuff they had found. So anyway, they ended up, I think, making 250 or 300 gold off selling everything. There were those little hand crossbows where it really helped them out a lot that they got from the armory. Um, and I allowed the bard because the bard had not had a musical instrument up to this point. It's like a fighter without a sword. Um, you know, um, and so I said, yeah, there's musical instruments here. So he bought a couple of musical instruments. So anyway, once everything was said and done, they sold, um, I think they had about 50 gold pieces left. Um, and so they got all geared up. Now, 2 of the characters ended up going to the inn while all this was going on. And so I let them do that. They were kind of getting the rumors and stuff that they could get from the inn. Now, they did say, I want to see if anybody looks weird. And I let them roll, and I said no. And I was like, there's not going to be anybody weird there for them to find, like that seems suspicious. But in retrospect, I wonder if I shouldn't have maybe kind of tried to work in this Drow pursuit, just as a narrative thing, not actual numerical. It increases or decreases their pursuit level. But yeah, you are we kind of looked at, but I didn't do that. Maybe I should have in retrospect. Anyway, so all that happened. Um, they sold. They did that. There were people looking, hey, can I find this? Can I find that? And I was kind of working with them on that. And I also introduced in the book the Blade Bazaar is a good time to introduce the fact that the madness is spreading through Gracklstugh. So I was kind of giving mannerisms and weirdness that the merchants were doing, and it's listed in the book, some examples you can do. I worked a few of those in. I also had Bupido kept trying to escape, and he was rolling his stealth versus uh, their passive perceptions because nobody said, hey, I'm specifically keeping an eye on Bupido. And the first time he got noticed um, and wasn't able to get away, even after that, nobody said, hey, I'm keeping an eye on him. So the next time they got to the Blade Bazaar, hustle, bustle, craziness, noise, all this. Everyone's, hey, I'm doing this and da-da-da. So I gave him a stealth check with advantage, and he ended up beating all their passive perceptions. So he got away. So the next time, and he's going to his lair in the Whirlstone Tunnel. So if they happen to make it there in the game, they'll find him again and have that encounter. And so by the time somebody mentioned him again, I was like, oh, well, he's gone. And they're like, who cares? So anyway, so Bupido made it away. So yet another NPC, boop, disappears off the list for the moment. So now I'm down to Eldith, the female dwarf, Shushar, the awakened male Kuatoa, Stool, and the Myconid Sprout, who's a favorite, and then Sereth, the Drow. So that's where we're at, NPC-wise, which is much more manageable. And 4 of my players are going on an extended trip of 2 months, so the group's going to be much more manageable for the next few months. Not that I won't miss my players that are leaving, because we all have fun, but that'll tie into the end of how I wrapped up last night's session as well. So anyway, so in one character, the monk, I think he said he was looking around for anything. He just did a perception check at the market. So I let him, there's a character that can possibly figure in prominently to what happens in Gracklstugh, and his name is Droki. He's kind of he's a Darrow that dresses kind of, what's the word? Not elegant, eccentric. He dresses kind of eccentrically, and I had him spot Droki, just to kind of seed that for later, because the Droki can figure. In fact, if they go to the Whirlstone tunnels and all that, I think Droki's one of the main plot hooks that gets them there. So now there's a lot of random encounters that can happen in Gracklstugh. I didn't do any of those last night. I had specific stuff I wanted to have happen. I have 2 hours to get it done. Pardon me. But I may do it in the future. But I had the 2 people in the inn. 2 of my characters went to the inn, and they hadn't actually got rooms yet. They were just hanging out and kind of in the common area, the dining area, talking and getting rumors. And the rumors were basically, things are getting weird out there. Talking about people acting strangely, and maybe even demons attacking remote outposts and settlements and stuff like that. So that was kind of the majority of the scuttlebutt that they got. Now, so the group finally said, okay, we're going to the inn. And then there's 2 people in the inn. And at this point, we're getting kind of close towards the end of the night, and there's something, I wanted to have 2 things happen. One was I had to narratively write out the characters that were going to be gone for the next couple of months. There's 4 players, they're just gone. It's a family, a father and his son and 2 daughters. They're going to be gone for 2 months. So, but I know they're coming back. So I had to narratively write them out. And then 2, there's a couple of interesting things that can happen to kick off a lot of stuff. One is you can be captured by the guards, or 2, there's a dragon in Gracklstugh. He's kind of captive, and these priests kind of psionically control him to keep all the smelting fires burning in Gracklstugh. And I think it's the keepers of the flame are who sort of guard and control him. But there's a whole chain of kind of a quest thing that can kick off with them. And I thought it would be really interesting to end the adventure on the dragon. Out of all the things that could have happened, I just chose to do that. So I wanted to have the 4 characters that are getting written out for a couple of months. I wanted them arrested. They're getting arrested, and then we don't know what happens to them for a couple of months. The other characters that are remaining, I wanted to end up with the dragon. So what had happened? There's it's not so much a random event. It's just something that you can have happen whenever you want. And it's this rampaging stone giant that's grown a second head crashes through a gate. Now, what's supposed to happen, if the players get involved, is the players help defeat it. And then the guards and everybody are like, wow, thank you for your help. And it kind of gives them like prestige or maybe a little bit of advantage when dealing with the duergar for a little while, as long as that makes sense. I decided to have it turn into a big mess. Uh, and so with it, they fought the stone giant, and they were just going in. They had just opened up the door to the inn to go in, and the two characters that were in the room had looked, that were in the inn, looked over, saw them about to come in, and then the giant crashed through a nearby gate, and it's like, oh, it's on now. So my party, there was no problem. My characters, they were like, they just charged that giant. I was watching the Wizards of the Coast D&D stream with Greg Tito, where he ran them through Out of the Abyss, and they sidestepped the encounter. I could tell Greg was like, okay, and he was, I think he was, he even mentioned something. I was like, thank you for dodging the encounter that I had for you, just kind of joking around. But anyway, so they charged in. Uh, and this fight, I mean, the stone giant is pretty nasty, and if I didn't have a large group, it could have gone much worse. But between the size of the group and the fact that at the end of the second round and further, each subsequent round, the duergar are helping. And the way it says, like 4 duergar guards, I think 2 guards and 2 of these, I can't remember the name, they have like fire lances. They jump in. And it says the way to handle that is they just do 10 points of damage to the giant per round. You don't have to roll for all the duergar and keep up with all that. So I worked that in. Now the monk took 2 bam, bam, from the stone giant, and one of those was a natural 20. So by rolling the dice, he is dead. If I took the average damage that was in the book, he was dead by 1 hit point. So I ruled that. At first I was like, man, I don't know what to tell you. Your dude's dead. And I was like, wait, let me look at the average damage and all that. So, okay, so here's the deal. I said, you're down, and you've already failed 2 death saving throws. So that's where you're that close to death is what I ruled, because I didn't, I don't know. I just decided not to kill him. So I guess I could have, but I had some GM grace there and allowed him to be alive, but very, 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 very close to death. And luckily, between the bard and the cleric that are in the party, he got healed up fairly quickly. So anyway, they made fairly short work of the stone giant. And the stone giant is kind of another indication of there's madness in the city. And if they had a chance, there's another giant, and I described this other giant coming into the mix to, like, oh, what's going on here, and checking on his fallen friend. And, I made it clear he doesn't seem hostile, so they didn't attack. But after the fight, the guards that were nearby were like, wait, thank you. They were appreciative of the character's help, and all the bystanders saw what happened. But another stone giant shows up with another group of duergar soldiers, and the captain of that group was like, arrest everybody. He didn't care, and people were like, no, they helped. And he's like, I don't care. All he saw was craziness, a dead stone giant, destroyed gates, and adventurers there with weapons out, and just chaos. He didn't care. He's like, arrest everybody. So, and that's not how it's really supposed to go in the book, but I did this narratively to separate my 4 characters that have to go on for a couple months. So what I had happen was that red-robed keepers of the flame who had been watching were like, huh, so they stepped in and showed their little insignia, got into basically a pissing battle with the captain of the duergar that wanted to arrest everybody. And in the chaos, long story short, the group got separated, 4 of them got arrested, and the rest of them got taken by the keepers of the flame to Themberchaud's lair. And Themberchaud, we'll talk about more. I think it's Themberchaud. That's a red dragon he's an adult red dragon, and he's manipulated by these priests psionically to do the will of Gracklstugh, but he's starting to kind of chafe at that. And we'll go more into it next session, but they usually replace the red dragon about this time, but the egg that they were going to use to do that has been stolen. So, and there's tension between Themberchaud and his keepers, and anyway, so they get taken to Themberchaud's lair. I described because they got to go into the other part of the city, and so I described that it's separated by a rift with stone bridges and all this stuff. And anytime they were stopped and questioned, they kind of showed an insignia, these red robe duergar, and people were like, okay, cool. So I got them, and this is how I ended things. I got them to Thimberchod's lair, and I said, as the duergar priest leads you to a building carved from the stone just outside a huge cave entrance, the ground trembles slightly, and a thunderous voice echoes against every wall. Gartokar, the voice calls as a reptilian behemoth comes into view. Its scales the color of lava, its bright yellow eyes glowing in the shadows of the cave before coming into the light. You didn't say I was having surfacers for dinner today. And then I went, see you next week, and I ended it right there. So I thought that was a great way to end it. So narratively, I was able to explain the separation of the characters, and then it had a great cliffhanger to end it on, and everyone seemed to have a good time. So again, fun adventure. Gracklstugh, boy, it's a lot to handle. I was like, wow, really. I mean, there's so much more that can happen in Gracklstugh. But I think we're going to be here for a few sessions. Now, the characters originally were like, well, let's get in there, get our stuff, and get out. But of course, this is D&D, so we can't let it be that easy. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. If you have any tips or comments, or just, hey, here's how it's going in my campaign, or whatever, then please leave them. It helps me out tremendously if you leave comments or leave a like, a thumbs up in YouTube. And hopefully we'll catch you next time on the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series. Thanks so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it.